Hello everyone, welcome to Michigan Man MTG, and today we're going to look at the top 20 uncommons from Edge of Eternity that I think are going to have the most long-term impact on Standard. So before we dive into the list, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Edge of Eternity's previous season and beyond. Alright, so let's dive into our list. So I've got a couple of honorable mentions here. The first is Seed Ship Impact. 2 mana in green, destroy an artifact or enchantment, and if its mana value was 2 or less, create a lander token. So very good card here for removing artifacts and enchantments. Now, we've got currently in Standard 2 mana green ones that also kill a creature with flying, so I think right now this probably isn't the best, but if we do have a lot of low cost artifacts and enchantments, then I think this has a chance to see Standard play because you're going to be able to get that lander token. Certainly a card I would want to include in my limited deck. Next, we've got our second honorable mention, which is Annul. And Annul is a reprint, goes all the way back to Urza Saga. And for 1 blue mana, you get to counter an artifact or enchantment spell. And if you've been playing Standard for a while, or on Arena for a while, you know that we've got lots of artifacts, lots of enchantments floating around. And because of that, Annul is going to be a very, very powerful spell going forward, particularly against the Overlords from Duskmourn. 1 mana to counter those, I think, is going to be incredibly powerful moving forward. Alright, so let's get into my list. So at number 20, I've got Honored Knight Captain. For 1 and a white mana, you get a Human Advisor Knight. That's a 1/1. And when this creature enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So this is replacing, in essence, Resolute Reinforcements, but it doesn't have flash. But what it does have is a 6 mana ability where you can sacrifice this creature and search your library for an equipment card, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle. So a little bit of upside in the late game when this probably isn't going to matter much. So I think this is probably going to go wide strategy, but we might see a deck that wants this early in the game, potentially for it to have a few blockers. And then late in the game, you're going to sacrifice it to go ahead and get that equipment, put it on the battlefield, and go from there. All right, at number 19, I've got Scout for Survivors. For 2 and a white mana, you get a sorcery, and you get to return up to 3 target creature cards with a total mana value of 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield and put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. Now, I think this probably is ideal for a deck where we're seeing a lot of sacrifice effects, because you're going to be able to sacrifice things that are 1 mana throughout the course of the game, and then late in the game you can use this. They come back, they're now 2/2s or 3/2s, depending on what the card is. So I think there's a chance that this has a home somewhere in that style of deck. At number 18, I've got Sunstar Expansionist. For 1 and a white mana, you get a Human Knight. That's a 2/3. And when this creature enters, if an opponent controls more lands than you, create a lander token. So a little bit of mana fixing when this card comes into play. So if you're going second, your opponent plays their 3rd land, then you can play this before you play your 3rd land, and then you're getting the advantage of getting the lander token. And it also has landfall, so that might be relevant in Standard. And so whenever a land comes into control, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And it is a 2/3, so it is a card definitely that Wizards is trying to get us to see some play with. All right, at number 17, I've got Hymn of the Faller. For 2 mana, you get a sorcery. You get to surveil 1, then draw a card and lose a life. But its void ability, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped this turn, you get to draw an additional card. So potentially in black, you can surveil, pay a life, and draw 2 cards if something went to the graveyard this turn, or you warped a spell. And I think there will be definitely decks that want to take this ability and run with it. In the sacrifice deck, I think is probably the most likely place this goes into, because they're going to be obviously sacrificing things regularly. And because of that, you'll be able to draw 2 for 2 in black, which is an incredible value for this kind of card. All right, number 16, I have Siege Ship Brood Tender for a black and a green mana. You get an Insect Citizen who's a 2/3, and when this creature enters, you get to mill 3 cards. And then for 5 mana, you can sacrifice this creature, return target creature or spacecraft card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and activate only as a sorcery. Now, I think this potentially has a home in our graveyard strategy decks where they want to mill things into the graveyard naturally. And because of that, I think that reanimate ability on it makes it playable in standard, because in the late game, you're going to sacrifice it and reanimate an important card from your graveyard and get a lot of value at that point. So I think Siege Ship Brood Tender has a home potentially in our mill decks. And number 15, I've got Alpha Raal Dreaming Acolyte, 3 mana in blue and black. You legendary creature that's a human cleric and is a 2/3. And when Alpha Raal enters, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. And during your turn, Alpha Raal has Death Touch. So, good card. And I think we've got a number of decks that are using the ability of, draw a discard. And because of that, and actually the current VV deck is doing this as well, but I think there's probably a deck that we can incorporate some black with that might actually help that deck a little bit. And for that reason, I think Alpha Raal is going to see a little bit of play in standard. All right, in number 14, I've got Timeline Color for 2 black mana. You get a Drix Warlock, and he's a 2/2 with haste, and you may cast this card from your graveyard using its warp ability, which is pay 1 black mana and you pay 2 life. So I really like this card. Initially I had it a little higher, but I'm not sure that this is going to see a tremendous amount of play given right now what we have in black in standard at the 2-drop spot. So I don't think there's a natural home for this right now, but I think there's a good chance that this does see play because of that ability to recur it. And specifically in a black deck where there's a lot of life gain going on, I think Timeline Color is a very nice card. At number 13, I've got Larval Scoutlander for 2 and a green mana. You get an artifact spacecraft, that's a 3/3. And when this spacecraft enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land or a lander token. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this is a way of getting a few extra landfall triggers. So I think this potentially goes in our landfall deck, the Tifa Lockhart deck that we are seeing a lot of play with currently in standard. And because of that ability to do this, I think there's going to be ample opportunities to even get to its 7 station ability. And station is where you tap another creature you control, put charge counters equal to its power on this spacecraft. Station only as a sorcery. It's an artifact creature at 7+ counters on it. So I think there's a way that this actually becomes a pretty important card in that deck because you're sacrificing probably a land in the landfall deck, but what you're actually able to do is get 2 additional landfall triggers, and for Tifa, that's going to double her power twice, and that may be enough on that particular turn to just simply win the game. And if it's not, then over the course of a few turns, maybe you got some creatures that don't attack well, given the current board state, that you just tap them and you use it to station Larval Scoutlander, and then it becomes that 3/3 flyer that can go over your opponent. So I like this card. I've got it at number 13. Coming in at number 12, I've got Full Bore for a red mana. You get an instant. Target creature you control gets +3/+2 until end of turn. If that creature was cast for its warp cost, it also gains trample and haste until end of turn. So I think this is going to be a card that if we do have a dedicated warp deck in standard, this is going to be a very important card in that deck because it's going to give all of those creatures haste and that +3/+2 boost for only a mana and getting trample and haste out of it, I think is a really powerful ability. And we've lost currently, we just lost one of the most powerful cards we've seen that's an instant in Monstrous Rage. And because of that, I think this is a card that potentially has an opportunity maybe to replace those in standard. All right, at number 11, I've got Uthros Psionistic for 2 and a blue mana. You get a Jellyfish Scientist. That's a 2/4. And the second spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. So I'm looking at this one as a card, 2/4 body, perfectly fine for 3 mana. But if you're in a deck that's trying to double spell every turn to get either something created or getting another advantage, then I think that mana reduction from Uthros Psionistic is good enough to see standard play because reducing those costs is very important. And what we've seen over the last couple of years, Wizards of the Coast has been putting out a lot of cards that, hey, if you do something with it, then on your opponent's turn, then we reduce the cost, or ways to reduce the cost of stuff. In this card in particular is just a way to give that ability to any card. And I think because of that, we're going to see this in standard. All right, coming in at number 10, we've got Honor for a white mana. It's a sorcery, so it's at sorcery speed. It would be great if it was at instant speed, but we'll take it at sorcery speed. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and you get to draw a card. Okay, simple, but very effective. Where you're gonna, pump up your team a little bit. You get that card draw all for 1 mana, and we've seen spells that have done one or the other, give them a +1/+1 counter or draw a card for 1 mana and white. But now we're seeing it together, and I think that's going to make it playable in standard. Coming in at number 9, I've got Close Encounter for 1 and a green mana. You get an instant. As additional cost to cast this spell, choose a creature you own or a warp creature card you own in exile. Close Encounter deals damage equal to the power of the chosen creature or card to target creature. So I really like this in a warp deck where you're going to warp things into play. They leave play at the end of the turn, and then you have those in exile, and you play Close Encounter, and it's guaranteed to do that much damage to one of your opponent's creatures. And I think that is going to be critical in standard, because one of the big problems with these bite spells historically is the opponent could simply remove the creature that you're targeting, and because of that, your spell fizzles. Well, this is a way to guarantee that your spell is going to go through because they can't get rid of your card in exile. All right, coming in at number 8, I've got Kavarin Harrier for a white, for a red mana. Artifact creature, robot soldier, and is a 2/1. And whenever this creature attacks, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token that's tapped and attacking. Sacrifice that token at the end of combat. So this is an interesting one. It is a 2/1, so it's got, decent attacking stats so early in the game. But then, on turns you can't do anything. Then you can pay the 2 mana, created that 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token, and get some additional attack damage in potentially. And potentially, you're going to be able to do this multiple times in a game. So I think there's a chance that this does see some significant standard play. Again, the question is going to be, what style of deck is going to want this? And maybe this is a style of deck where this maybe goes in the Embodine Recruiter deck. that is losing a lot of cards, but maybe that can survive given some of the cards we've talked about from this set. Coming in at number 7, I've got Dauntless Scrapbot for 3 mana. It's an artifact creature and a robot. It's a 3/1. And the most important text on the card is, when this creature enters the battlefield, exile each opponent's graveyard, and you get to create a lander token. So for 3 mana, you get to exile your opponent's graveyard. So I think this is certainly a card that in decks that you don't have access to a way to exile your opponent's graveyard, this can easily be a sideboard option in those decks. And we do have a tremendous amount of decks right now that are using their graveyard very effectively, whether it's the Una deck or the Golgari graveyard strategy. But we have a lot of decks that are trying to utilize the graveyard in one way or another, and Dauntless Scrapbot is a creature that's going to get rid of the graveyard, and because of that, I think it's going to see play in Standard. At number 6, I've got Reroute Systems for a white mana. You get an instant. In target artifact or creature gains indestructible until end of turn. And it's nice there that it also says artifact, so if your opponent is targeting an artifact on your side, you can play Reroute Systems and protect it. We don't normally see that in Standard. And then also, you can use Reroute Systems to deal 2 damage to target creature that is tapped. And because of that, I think this is going to be a very flexible card in Standard, where you can give stuff indestructible, but also you could use it as a combat trick to deal damage to a tapped creature your opponent is attacking with. And because of that, this to me feels like a card that's going to see some Standard play, because this is another white card where we don't normally see those 2 abilities stapled on the same card, and because of that, I've got it at number 6. Coming in at number 5, I've got Station Monitor for a white and a blue mana. You get a Lizard Artificer, and is a 2/2, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and this token can block only creatures with flying. So I think it's a very good Magic card here. We know that we've got a number of decks that are trying to cast 2 spells a turn, and this is now a way to just create an additional creature that you're probably going to be mostly attacking with. And because of that, I've got it at number 5, because I feel like this is one that is going to see Standard play. Coming in at number 4, I've got Gigastorm Titan for 4 and a blue mana. You get a 4/4 elemental, but this spell costs 3 less to cast if you've cast another spell this turn. So you cast a 1 mana spell, and then on the subsequent after that, then you can cast this for 2 mana, which is really powerful in Standard. A 2 mana 4/4 early in the game. I mean, as early as, in theory, turn 3, you can get that out there, and possibly even turn 2 if you've got a Lion or Elf or some other way of generating extra mana. And because of that, I think this is going to see play in Standard for sure. Alright, coming in at number 3, I've got Umbral Collar Zealot for 1 and a black mana. You get a Human Cleric, that's a 3/2. And sacrifice another creature or artifact, and you get to Surveil 1. Now, we already have a sacrifice deck that's kind of a B-tier deck currently in Standard, but what I really like about this card is you get to Surveil. So, your top card's land, you don't need any more land, you just throw it in the graveyard. And because of that, and the ability to do this as many times as you want, we've got several cards that every time you sacrifice something, then you gain a life and your opponent loses a life. And if you've got multiple of those in play, and you've got a decent sized board, then you can just sacrifice stuff, Surveil to get more things into the graveyard, and then ultimately potentially just win the game by sacrificing stuff. We've got Bartolome as one of those payoff cards where he grows every time you sacrifice something. So I think there's a good chance that that deck becomes more powerful in Standard after rotation. And it might be one of the decks that we see early in Edge of Eternity Standard season as a deck that people are going to be playing, because people do like that sacrifice or aristocrat style deck. Coming in at number 2, I've got Tannic Memorial Ensign. For 1, a red and a green mana. You get a Kavu Pilot, and is a 2/4 with landfall. And whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, Tannic deals 1 damage to each opponent. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you get to draw a card. And we know that we've got a number of lands that come into play, and you sacrifice it and get another, and you go get a basic. So I think Tannic is going to be a card that is very important in those decks, because you're going to be able to not only do damage to your opponent, but every time you do it a second time in the same turn. And we talked about a card earlier that does this naturally, where it comes into play, you sacrifice a land and 2 lands come into play. So I think there's going to be enough payoffs for this that this is going to be an important card in Standard. All right, coming in at number 1, I've got Ruinous Rampage. For 1 and 2 red mana. You get a sorcery, and Ruinous Rampage deals either 3 damage to each opponent, so that makes it very commander friendly. Or you exile all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. So I think that's going to be a really powerful ability in Standard against those Simulacrum Synthesizer decks, because the cards that they're using are from Ixalan forward, so they're not rotating. And because of that, I think having a way to defeat that deck and destroy all of its artifacts is going to be really important. So this is not anything more than a sideboard card for red decks, but I think it's going to be an important one. And because of all of the artifact synergies that we're getting in Edge of Eternities, I think we're going to see a large number of artifacts that are going to be played over the course of the next couple of years. And because of that, Ruinous Rampage is a simple way to deal with all those artifacts that are 3 mana or less. And I've got it at number 1 for that reason. All right, so those are my top 20 uncommons from Edge of Eternities. I put links up to my ratings of the mythics for the set, and also my top 10 rares from Edge of Eternities. So thanks for staying to the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Edge of Eternity preview season and beyond. Thanks. I'll see you in the next one.